Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone throughout the world that's joined us in this Sawtooth Software webinar. We're excited to be here today with Chris Chapman. So yeah, the Quant UX and Marketing Research webinar from Sawtooth Software with our guest speaker, Chris Chapman. He's a principal UX researcher at Amazon, and we'll introduce him a little bit later. But we're excited to have everyone join us. I wanted to cover a bunch of upcoming events that we will be having. So coming up here in June 3rd through 5th, we'll have a virtual Lighthouse Studio choice modeling workshop that you can learn more on our website. If you can look at the URL there at the bottom of this slide, you can learn more about our virtual workshop there coming up on June 3rd. June 12th through 13th, this is the Quant UX Con. You can find out more about that conference at quantuxcon.org. And this is something that Chris Chapman is helping to organize. And Sawtooth Software is one of the main sponsors. And we'll be presenting 4 different presentations, I think actually 5 there at the conference. We're excited for that. On June 20th, we'll have our next Sawtooth Software webinar entitled Predictive Segmentation, Different Ways to Analyze Behavioral Choice Data, and a New Conjoint Design Technology. That will be given by our Keith Sean coming up on June 20th. July 20th, 22nd through 23rd, we'll have our Sawtooth Summer Training event here in Utah. And there you can come and learn more about CBC, MaxDiff, ACBC, market simulators. Again, you can learn more at the URL there at the bottom of the slide on our website under workshops. Oops, sorry. One more plug here. We'd love for you to check out our software. We're building some amazing stuff. We're really good at conjoint analysis and MaxDiff. We're easy to use. Sawtooth has incredible support. And you can actually try us for free if you go to discover.sawtoothsoftware.com and sign up. You can see our amazing platform and make a MaxDiff or a conjoint or any other type of survey you wish. Okay, let's get on to Chris Chapman. So I'm going to introduce Chris Chapman here. Chris Chapman is currently a principal UX researcher at Amazon Lab 126, where he leads research for Kindle readers, Echo speakers, and other devices. Formerly, he worked at research roles at Google and Microsoft. At Google, he taught choice modeling methods to more than 300 colleagues and built internal tools to support MaxDiff analysis. Chris is the former president of the American Marketing Association Insights Council and is currently president of the Quantitative Experience Association and co-chair of the annual Quant UX conference that we mentioned earlier. Most recently, Chris has co-authored Quantitative User Experience Research, and in his previous book, R for Marketing Research and Analytics, that book has been adopted as an analytics textbook in more than 140 universities and 29 countries. Chris is also a great friend of Sawtooth Software. We've had him out at many of our conferences. We talked with him a lot. He's just a great guy. So introducing Chris Chapman. Chris, could you turn on your camera and share your screen? Take it away.
Yeah, well, thank you for that introduction, Justin. It's wonderful to be here. I've been a user of Sawtooth Software, I believe for 18 years I was thinking this, and starting with a training that I did a long time ago with Brian Orm. So let me share my slides here, and I'll switch over to that. Are those coming across now?
I can see them, yes. That's great.
Yeah, wonderful. So, cool. Justin said much of this, so I'm not going to repeat, too much introduction of myself, except to say that I come to this from a social science background. So I was a clinical and personality psychologist, and then I've worked on a bunch of different products over the years, starting at Microsoft with Windows and hardware, Google, where I worked in a number of divisions, especially cloud computing, which I'll talk about a bit later, and now working on the industrial design of devices at Amazon. So we do things like the physical look and feel and interaction, touch, and that sort of thing with Kindle readers, Echo speakers, Fire tablets, Fire TV. Pretty much if it's an Amazon device, that's coming from our group. And so I work on both the preferences as well as the strategy for those. And as a side volunteer project, I with some friends started the Quant UX Association a few years ago, and it's grown into this popular and low cost online conference that's in June. So I'm going to talk today about what is Quant UX research, how does it intersect with marketing research. There's some overlap and some differentiation, and then I'll walk through an example project that has used some of Sawtooth Software's technology. So Quant UX has two different meanings. It's a practice of quantitative methods in UX research that anyone might do. A general UX researcher, a program manager, a designer, anyone can use quant methods. But it's also a specific research role where people are hired with that title at Google, Meta, Amazon, various other companies. And so I'll talk about both of those, both the methods that are used and then a bit about the role itself as we go. So quant UX research is nested inside the larger kind of circle of user experience research generally. And user experience research, it takes kind of nebulous product questions and turns them into actionable research projects. So similar to marketing research in this way, a stakeholder might come and ask, what does our product need to do in the next version? Or what are users doing with it? Or who are our users? And those are kind of nebulous questions because there are many different ways to answer them. It's unclear what they really want to know. And so in classic research design, we want to take those kind of vague questions and turn them into actionable and decision-oriented projects. We do that by applying appropriate and rigorous research methods, and I'll talk about the landscape of those methods in a moment. And then, of course, deliver back answers to the stakeholders. And so the intersection of these things with a heavy product focus, is where UX research generally lands. So among the methods there, if we look at what people say that they do, so kind of stated usage or stated needs or stated preference versus what they actually do behaviorally. So maybe revealed usage or revealed preferences. We can arrange methods on that axis. We can also go for more of a qualitative why sort of approach or more of a quantitative how much kind of approach. And, these axes are not mutually exclusive, so there's a bit of simplification here, but I think it helps to organize some of these methods across the UX research space. So if we look at what people do and why they do it, we have classic UX research methods like a usability lab study. Bring people in and observe them using the product. Eye tracking to observe what they're doing, or field visits. What are they doing in their offices or their homes? And so these tend to be what's often called qualitative UX research. If we look more at the stated needs or stated behavior category, we have methods like focus groups or a cognitive walkthrough where someone may have a prototype of a product and then they just talk about what they expect through it, or a diary study, concept testing. So these things all give us deep insight into why people want something. Moving over to the quantitative side of how much, we have methods such as A/B experiments. So putting out field trials of products or experiences, a logs analysis. So as people use a product, what are they actually doing? What's the sequence of events that they're going through? Where are they running into trouble or dropping off in their behavior? And then on more of the stated side, but in a quantitative approach, we have things like survey research. But we also might do something like experience sampling, where we give people pop-ups through the day and ask them, what are you doing right now? Or of course, product feedback forms. So UX researchers are drawing from this entire landscape, and any given person will have a specialization in one area or another. Uh, but in forming a research program, they should be thinking about all of these quadrants in some way. Okay. So if we look at the quantitative research role, we take that same map and kind of blow it up. Quant UX researchers tend to work on this right-hand side. So they might have a focus on something like logs analysis. So working with instrumented data from, web services or from physical products, doing A/B experiments. These would overlap heavily with classic data science kinds of approaches. Or they may be up in the upper right quadrant, they may be survey research experts and work primarily in that area. And of course, they can draw from all of this. An important thing here as well is that as user experience researchers, Quant UX researchers are embedded in this larger UX research organization. And that implies that they're working also on the left-hand side of this as well. And so it's been common, in my own research landscape to go and do things like focus groups or site visits or usability lab studies and to bring those in. And so by no means is someone working in UX research isolated in just any one side of this or any one quadrant, but they should draw holistically from all of this. And you may notice that many of these things overlap with marketing research. I'll talk more about that in a bit, but some of them are unique. It would be unusual, for example, for a marketing researcher to do a cognitive walkthrough or maybe a usability lab study. But they, very much would do something like surveys or look at product feedback. So the skills needed, switching over to the role now, the skills that are needed to be a UX researcher, number one is experimental design for human research. And so folks often are coming from a social science background or specific training in human computer interaction or user experience research. But getting the experimental design right is fundamental to this role. And then UX researchers need some degree of basic statistics, descriptive statistics, and regression are common, and great communication skills, and some experience or at least interest and aptitude to applying all of the research skills above to human-computer interaction. It's very much a role that's about what are people doing with these products, as opposed to more general kinds of data. On the quant side, those things get tuned up to have more of a data science kind of perspective. So we have experimental design, but now we're bringing in more advanced statistical methods. It's often important, not strictly required necessarily, but I would say highly advantageous to be able to program in a general purpose language like R, for example, or Python, to be able to work with data sets from many different sources. And then again, in addition to those statistical and programming skills, it's important to communicate those things very clearly. So user experience researchers they have a lot of direct face-to-face interaction with product managers, designers, executives, and so forth. And so the communication skills are at least as important as the technical skills. And finally, they really need to have interest or experiment in application to human-computer interaction. Okay, so looking at that with the Venn diagram, we can see there are 4 skill sets in Quant UX that intersect, and you might guess they intersect in the middle here. And those are coding and programming, statistics and doing great statistical research, research design to make sure that the data are good data. So it's not merely just working with data that's thrown over a wall, but making sure the data is the right data one needs to begin with. And then applying all of that to user experience. So as we start to come in towards the middle of this Venn diagram, we see some roles such as if you just emphasize programming, that's where software engineers are, or statistics might be a statistician. For great human research, you might be a psychologist or a political scientist. And then finally, if you just focus on user experience, you might be a designer. And as we start to look at the intersection of these, then we find things like human research and design focus intersect in user experience research in the upper right. Research design and statistics come into applied statistics like biostatistics or other statistical specialties. The intersection of that and software engineering would be computational statistics and so forth. But coming a bit farther, we find mixed methods user experience research, where the general kind of research design applied to user experience starts to bring in statistical methods, and mixed methods researchers, as they're often called, may do things like survey research, for example. And finally, if we put all those skills together and bring in advanced statistics and some degree of programming, then we have Quant UX at the center of this. And, this diagram is both, I would say, prescriptive in the sense that I believe this is where Quant UX should be. It's also descriptive. So when I worked at Google, one of the things I did was help write some of the job requirements and so forth for hiring folks. And we interviewed people in all four of these areas. So people who were applying for a Quant UX role would get an interview on basic programming, and one applied to research design and so forth. And in the quantitative user experience research book, that I wrote with Carrie Rodden, we have chapters applied to each one of these and talk about some common questions, and then describe the the rubrics that might be used to evaluate skills in this area. Okay, so you might be wondering, how does that intersect? Sounds a lot like data science, right? So you've got research design and statistics and programming, applying it to stakeholders. And I would say that's true. The primary differentiation from data science is the application to user experience. And that's application both in the problems of, the details of working with human data and the vagaries and questions and uncertainties that arise in human data. How do you write a good survey? And how do you know that your data are good? How do you deal with missing data or non-response bias or those sorts of things? Data scientists, often do not have experience with those kinds of questions, but they're crucial in working with human data. Another way to look at it is that it's a subset relationship. So Quant UX is kind of data science applied to UX questions and working in user experience organizations. And I'll say a bit more about the organizational part later. So they're closely related, and people often move between the two. Folks are hired into Quant UX roles often from data science roles. Some companies, they may be called data scientists, even if I would say what they're doing is Quant UX and so forth. So they're very closely related in that sense. Now, the big differentiation here is versus marketing research. And this is more complex than the data science relationship. And so I'm going to talk about it at some length, and I think it will, may be of interest to folks on this call. And I'll start with this chart, which is, a bit of an eye test chart, but I'll deconstruct it slightly and then explain why I have a chart like this. So first of all, the idea here is that we're leading through the end-to-end experience of delivering a product from its initial idea at the top, so defining the product, and then we want to go through the 4 Ps, the marketing, we're going to price it, place it, promote it. And then our actions are kind of over at that point to a large extent, and it's on the customer side now to decide what products they choose. They can complete a sale or not, and then they take it home or to their office and they use the product and they have an experience, and then that experience feeds back into their next set of choices. And at each stage in this, in defining the product on the top roll, we have to define the use cases that the product's going to meet, the design, delivering the feature, setting the performance, and so forth. We're going to price it, we're going to place it, we're going to promote it. Each one of those has multiple steps This chart's not intended to be exhaustive in any way, and you can replace or add any of these boxes, but it's to illustrate that, this process of delivering a successful product has many steps at a high level on the left-hand side, and each one of those steps has multiple requirements that have to be delivered successfully. And so you might look at this as an and, where every one of the blue arrows here is sort of an and. You have to do this and that, and this other, and this other. And failure in any one of these, will lead to a failed product or a failed business. And so delivering a successful product is a complex enterprise. It's, the competitive space is tough. Nothing guarantees success. And we have to simultaneously execute across all of these things. And an implication here is, that there's no magic bullet. So we can have a great idea or great features or great performance, or a great brand. That's not enough. No one thing is enough. There's some methodological implications here, like it's very difficult to isolate the causal effect of any single decision unless it's a negative effect. But the positive effect tends to be very diffuse across all of these things. And it's also to say that we need to make sure to pay attention to all of these things as we're delivering products. And so now as we put a role-based view on this, if we look at the parts of this chart that are specific to user experience, it's very much on defining the product first, and a little bit about perhaps pricing it or the competition. And then the user experience role kind of drops out until the product is delivered and we look at the actual usage and experience of it after delivery. And so there's a little bit in the middle about understanding people's preferences, but largely user experience is about defining the product first of all and what it needs to do, and then looking at what people are actually doing with it once they have purchased it or otherwise chosen it. So it's extremely product and experience focused. But if we put a marketing research overlap on it, what we see is that marketing can be involved in the use cases, the design, the feature specification, of course, in the pricing and the lineup and competition, the channel strategy, the advertising, so at every step of the process, end to end, there are places where marketing research comes in to this. And that means that, there's overlap as well as differentiation from user experience research. And so the marketing view is end to end, but it's somewhat less focused on the product. And as I'll talk about in a moment, it's less focused on the product from an organizational, where it sits within the organizational typically is less directly connected to the product. And it's also less focused to the extent that it's including many more areas in this holistic view as compared to UX research. But there's a lot of overlap. So the orange boxes here are places where research might be done by marketing research, might be done by user experience research. The differentiation may depend on the organization, may depend on the industry, may depend on the preferences or skills of the people or the institutional history where they are. And so it's quite feasible to see marketing research, defining the features and design or the use cases of a product. It's also quite feasible to have cases where user experience research is doing that and the marketing organization is only tangentially involved in this. And so one of the things that I often find in talking about UX research with folks who are in marketing research in other organizations like consumer product organizations is they'll say, oh, these things UX researchers are doing, that's just marketing research. It's no different. And I'd say, well, it's sitting in a different place in the organization perhaps, and it has a different emphasis in its, focus on the end user. But yes, the deliverables and the decisions being made and even the skills needed to do the research overlap tremendously. And so, so the differentiation is, it's a lot of gray space here. But there are places where clearly one or the other tends to, to be dominant. So on the organizational side, if we look at this is kind of a high level view, and their organizations come in many different flavors, but this is a schematic that I would say reflects my average observation of organizations. Uh, UX research and quant UX research tends to sit within the product development arm of an organization. So many organizations have an engineering arm, and then they'll have sales, marketing, or other things that have a different reporting structure. And so there may be a vice president of engineering at the top and a vice president of of sales and marketing, for example. And UX research will tend to report up through the engineering organization. And so much so that at some companies, and especially in the past, it was called usability engineering was the name for UX research. And so, the idea was that it really is a part of engineering. Um, and marketing, tends to be parallel to that organizationally. That is reflected in the key stakeholders. So the folks that UX researchers work with day to day tend to be product managers, and then also designers and engineers very directly. And so their questions are coming in at this very specific level around what do we need to make and why. And so, for example, some of my colleagues at Amazon Devices work on the human factors engineering, and they're answering questions like if we have a button on a product and people click the button, what's the force to click the button? Or, what's the weight, versus the grip of a device such that it's, comfortable to hold. And so user research is answering these questions that go, very closely into the product engineering. Of course, marketing researchers tend more often to work with executive stakeholders and more about the business strategy. There's intersection in the product management level. In executing research, UX researchers tend to do primary research. They're usually, if they do a survey, they're writing the survey themselves. If they're interviewing users, they are personally conducting the interviews, or perhaps they're a manager of a team that's doing that. And not so much work with external suppliers and vendors in UX research. It's viewed as kind of a primary research role, and similar to being an academic researcher in that sense, although it's of course applied to a business problem and within a business organization. Whereas marketing research is sometimes primary research where researchers are writing their own research, but oftentimes it's contracted out, and so they may purchase a segmentation study or have someone who's running brand um, sentiment surveys for them or something. And so they may be directing the work of other folks who are doing the primary research. And that means that the background skills needed for these are somewhat different, again, with overlap. UX researchers tend to come from some kind of human subjects research background, either human computer interaction specifically, or sometimes social science, like psychology, anthropology, political science, that sort of thing. Whereas marketing researchers may come from those domains. Of course, many social scientists end up in marketing research, but I'd say it's probably even more normative that they come from business and specific marketing research backgrounds. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about an example project here. I'm going to skip. I've got some questions. You'll see the slides later. I'm not going to go through these because I want to keep plenty of time for questions at the end. But I've laid out some typical questions that UX researchers get, and then the methods that we might use for them. And these are in the Quant UX book, and I'll just kind of leave it here for a moment if you want to take a look. But there's some models for UX metrics. UX researchers often do things that overlap with marketing research, like segmentation and clustering. But there's some unique methods like logs analysis and sunburst data visualization that, to my knowledge, don't appear much in the marketing research domain. And then we get overlap again with things like conjoint analysis and A/B experiments and satisfaction surveys. So the goal's not to do all of these, but as I mentioned earlier, to consider when and how they're needed. So this research domain is one of thinking about this whole landscape, and that eye chart I had with the 30 boxes of, what do we need to do for success? But I'm going to talk about two of these next. What features should we prioritize? And how do we compare to competition? And this will go into the case example. So I'm going to talk about prioritizing cloud user experience efforts. This was a project I did when I worked at Google Cloud. I was the first Quant UX researcher at Google Cloud, and so we built out a lot of capability. And I worked on this with co-author Eric Bana, who is a group product manager at Google. And we presented it publicly. There's a link here. When you get the slides, you can find a public presentation and some more detail from this. And our problem here was that the UX team had grown in the span of about 3 years from 25 user experience folks. This means design, research, content strategy. So everything that would be under user experience for Google Cloud. And it started with about 25 folks when I joined Google Cloud. And within about 3 years, it had grown to over 350 user experience folks working on different things. So this was at the time when cloud products were really, kind of at their inception and growing, insanely. And this led to an executive question, which was, we have 350 folks here working on all kinds of different things, and what should they be working on? How do we allocate those efforts for maximal customer impact? It's maybe we're well aligned across all of those for what they should be working on, but the guess was probably not. And so, how do we need to focus on different things? And the idea that Eric and I had was that, one way to approach this problem is that it could be viewed as a 2x2 sort of problem with 2 dimensions. So one is, for any given thing, how important is that thing? So if we look at some part of cloud, like backing up your cloud data, how important is that? And then how well are we doing on that versus a competition? And that if we had this sort of scatter plot where we could put the importance by the competitive position, that would give us insight into the landscape of prioritization. So we identified 33 cross-product tasks. I'm not going to go deeply into how we identified those, except to say that we were fortunate in the cloud space that there were certification bodies out there who identify the things that you need to know to be a cloud architect or other cloud certifications, and that forms a body of knowledge about the important tasks. And so we were able to take an initial list of those from the certification agencies and then boil it down to 33 tasks. And if you're thinking, sounds like a problem for max diff to prioritize those, you're right. And I'll get to that. Most folks on this call are probably familiar with the reasoning for max diff. But if we ask cloud administrators, how important is it to create a virtual machine or back up your data or understand your cloud bill or manage your users or any of these other 33 tasks? And what are they going to say? Well, they're all extremely important. In fact, you can't have a cloud product without any of those. So it's quite true that they are extremely important. The customer's right. And if they just simply run down a checklist and tell us they want all of those things and they're all extremely important, they are responding 100% accurately. But that doesn't mean that they're all equally important. And it doesn't mean that we're doing them equally well. So we need a more sensitive measure that will let us drill into the trade-offs here. And of course, MaxDiff does this. And it works by having a subset of items. So we might take 4 items here shown on the left. People say, well, which of these is most or least important for you in your role as a cloud administrator? And then my build's not working. But then they get randomized. We ask that again. They do another set. And so people can ask this in this forced trade-off method. And even if they're all important, they can, in this way, give us information about what's relatively more or less important for them. But a key thing here that comes in is that each respondent has a different set of items that may be important to them. And so if I ask a database administrator how important it is to understand their cloud billing, and they say, well, that's not important at all, that's because it's not important to them. It's not a relevant item to them. Cloud billing is important to someone, but it may not be important to that user. So when we administrate a max diff to these folks, we want to make sure that they're answering about the things that are relevant to them specifically. So we preceded this max diff item about what's most or least important with preceding items that says, is it relevant to you? Do you have visibility into this in your role? And if so, then we put it on a constructed list using Sawtooth Software and Lighthouse Studio here. And then we ask them, is it at least somewhat important to you? Because we want to drill down and spend their time in looking at what's, more or less important. And if it's just completely unimportant to that person, then we'll set it aside and not drill into this. So Eric and I called this constructed and augmented max diff, which was a terrible name. Brian Orm and other folks at Sawtooth came up with the better name of relevant items max diff, and so that's what I would call it today. And briefly, what we do is if they say it's relevant and it's at least somewhat important, then we segment these items, put it on a constructed list. We make sure that some of the things they say are unimportant or not relevant, that we sample in a couple of those items to ensure that there's continuity across item space. And then we construct a max diff where we're really drilling into the things for that person that are important for them and their role, to make sure the data are good and not incorrectly identifying things as unimportant just because it's a small audience. Okay, so with max diff, what we get now for those 33 tasks is, again, probably everyone's familiar with this, we get an importance on a metric scale. And so looking here, we'll see that task 28, roughly in the middle, was the most important task across these users, followed closely by task 27 from these items. Task 31, about 8 rows down, was by far the least important across these respondents. I can't tell you what the tasks are because it's disguised, but I can say they're all similar to those things I talked about earlier, such as setting user permissions or backing up data. And so now we have one of these dimensions. We know the task importance for each respondent, and we know it for our set of customers as a whole. And again, conditional on their role in it being important to them. So this has already been adjusted to make sure that it's kind of scaled to the sample base for each one of these tasks through the relevant items process. So that gives us the first dimension. So to get the second dimension of our competitive position, the way we did this was for those same 33 tasks, we asked respondents which of the cloud brands is best. Google Cloud, Amazon Web Services, Microsoft Azure, we had some other brands in there. And, if they said for, backing up data, one brand's best, but, for, administrating user permissions, a different brand is best, they could answer that. But there's a base rate problem because a given respondent may only know, one brand or two brands. And the brands have different sizes. So simply the proportion who say that a brand is best, the largest brands are going to tend to have the most users saying they're best. So we adjusted that to the base rate of the brands. And so if we look at just the red line here, this is one brand who was the largest cloud provider at the time. We can see that there are tasks such as task 3, which is down here about 10 rows down, was one where they were by far the best brand for that task. Much higher than their base rate, which is shown in the dotted line. You may recall task 3 was relatively unimportant from the previous slide. Whereas on task 32, 3 rows up from that, this brand 1 in red, many fewer people said that they were the best brand for that relative to their base rate. So by taking the proportion who said they were best or not best, subtracting the base rate and then scaling it for the spread, which differs, of course, proportionally to the base rate, this gives us a normalized score within each brand of how likely people are to say that a given task, that brand is ahead or behind relative to competition. So that gives us a second dimension. And by plotting those together, we see this sort of thing. And so so the tasks identified here in the upper right, we have tasks that are relatively low in importance. So they're to the left-hand side on the x-axis, which is importance axis. And Google, in this case, which is where I was working at the time, was ahead of the competition on these tasks. And so I say, well, we're ahead of competition, but they're relatively less important. Those are areas where we can reduce focus. But looking at the lower right here, we see tasks that are highly important, like this task 28. So we saw earlier was the number one most important task. But we were behind competition here. So those are places where we should increase our focus. So in thinking about how we would allocate our engineering and development efforts and our attention to customers, it would suggest shifting energy away from this upper left area and down into this lower right area. And then we could deconstruct things. And at an executive level, we had interesting discussions like, task 15 up here in the very unimportant quadrant in the upper left was one where executives heard from many customers about that task. And so the question was it actually unimportant? And what we found out was that no, that was a task where it tends to get escalated to the executive. So there's kind of oversampling in their view of that. And this let us bring in real customer data to kind of correct this perception of the strategic landscape. So this led to, drill down of things to answer why things were in various quadrants, as well as a strategic kind of reallocation of focus across this. And came from a relatively simple approach of, running a max diff, but, conditional on, instrumenting the max diff appropriately so that we were getting, very relevant data from each individual respondent who were coming from this complex landscape of cloud administrators. Okay, I'm going to take questions, I think, at the end, so I'll skip that. So I've got another slide here about some applications of these metrics that I talked about earlier. So in the metrics that we track in user experience, we often get questions of what should we track? This is something that I've often addressed by running workshops with engineering teams focused on the HEART metrics, which is an acronym, stands for happiness, engagement, adoption, retention, and task success. In the Quant UX book, there's a chapter about HEART metrics. You can also Google it and find a great article written by my co-author, Carrie Rodden, on Carrie's blog about the HEART metrics. Of course, target customers, probably no surprise to this audience. We would tend to use segmentation methods. What are users doing with the product? This often leads to usage pattern analysis or trajectory analysis. I've done growth curve modeling together with a clustering to look at common patterns of customer change over time. Of course, prioritization, I just showed an example of max diff. Perceptual mapping is one I often use for competitive analysis. And then, of course, we get conjoint engineering for feature optimization and A/B experiments and causal modeling, and then satisfaction methods. So probably some of the things here may be new to folks, like trajectory analysis or the HEART workshops, but others we see where very classic and traditional marketing research methods overlap strongly in this UX space. Okay, if you want to learn more about any of this, there's the Quant UX conference coming up in June. Sawtooth Software is a platinum sponsor of this, so thank you to everyone at Sawtooth, both for the talks that you will give as presenters at the conference and for making it available and accessible worldwide. Quant UX Con's a relatively low-cost conference. It has over 100 presentations, and the standard ticket price is $125. But for folks who can't pay, there's also a scholarship option that's on an honor system. So no one should, should miss it if you're interested at all. And it occurs around the clock for 32 consecutive hours. So whatever your time zone might be, there will be presentations that are friendly for you and recordings accessible afterwards. I'm teaching a choice modeling class in Seattle in August. And so this is a UX focused view on max diff and conjoint analysis. And then I've got links to, the books here on, R for marketing research and analytics. There's also a Python language version of that book. And then the new book on Quant UX research. And the Quant UX research book has both methodological chapters for some of these methods, like sunburst diagrams to look at user usage and patterns of usage. There's a chapter on CSAT surveys. There's one on heart metrics. It also has career and organizational chapters on, what do you need to do to get into this space? And so, I hope that would be, additive for folks who are in a research role and thinking about that, but also a good introduction for folks who want to know more about Quant UX and it's a growing role. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Justin in a moment and say, I'll take all your questions. You can ask me anything. I will answer anything that I can, or hopefully say that I don't know if I don't know. And, and I've got my email address here with the Quant UX Association for contact. And with that, back to you, Justin.
Great. Thanks, Chris. Hope you guys enjoyed that presentation. We have a bunch of questions still ready for you, Chris. Before we get to the Q&A section, just a reminder here on all the events coming up. You can go to sawtoothsoftware.com/workshops to see our workshops coming up. Our next webinar is June 20th. And as Chris said, this big Quant UX Con coming up June 12th. We've participated that in a few years now, and it's just great. So just a lot of content and very, very low cost to no cost. Just a reminder, we have some excellent software we'd love for you to check out. We also have an amazing consulting team that can help you with any questions that you have. We believe we are the experts. We have tons of experience. And again, a great tool to get started here is discover.sawtoothsoftware.com. With that, let's get into the Q&A. Just a reminder, Chris is really friendly, and he's providing his email address, which can be helpful. Please don't overwhelm him, but definitely he's friendly and willing to answer some questions. And also, any questions you have for us, you can direct towards me or the main contact information here. Okay, with that, let's get going on the Q&A, Chris. Some of these I hope we can understand context, but the first one. What and why is there a danger zone on that Venn diagram?
Yeah, good question. So the danger zone is where kind of a focus on design intersects with statistical methods, but without intersecting with research design. So I have the kind of human-focused research design. And so I think if you try to do statistics, but you don't have a background in human research, then you can end up in danger. And this is often where I see that folks, write their own surveys and send them out, and the survey may be low quality, or their analysis may be, kind of random based on the results. So that's the danger zone.
Great, thanks. Next question from Matthew. Hi, Chris. How has your background in psychology helped you in marketing research?
Yeah, thank you. It's been the background in psychology, I would say, has three important components to that. One is just social science research and having that strong kind of grounding in what good research is and what it looks like and how to write about it, that sort of thing. A second that's specific to clinical psychology is an intersection with the qualitative space. And so, although I have the academic and statistical training on the research methods, I've spent hundreds or perhaps thousands of hours directly engaging with patients, and that experience in doing interviews and listening to people deeply has really informed the qualitative side of my work over the years. And then the third, which is specific to psychology and personality psych and clinical for that matter, is a focus on psychometrics. So how do we know that an item is a good item? How do we know whether it's assessing the thing that we want it to assess? And so writing good surveys from a psychometric perspective, it's psychology is a great background for that. It's not the only background for that, but it's a great background for it.
Great, thank you. I think this is related to the question you already answered, but hey, Chris, the danger area of your Venn diagram due to divergent opinions is the danger area in your Venn diagram due to divergent opinions between statisticians and designers?
No, it's really more just, folks who, are doing stats without enough background in it this comes up in many areas, not only marketing research and UX research, but things like medical research, for example, where, you need some expertise in research design.
Okay, next one. In an organization, would you recommend these departments living together? I'm guessing it's talking about UX research and marketing research.
That often occurs. I generally do not personally recommend that they go together, and there are a couple reasons for that. From an organizational dimension, I think that they pull in different directions that are kind of hard to reconcile. So they talked about UX research often is impacting engineering decisions at a very detailed and kind of local, which is not to say tactical, because it can be strategic, but it's really going kind of deep into the engineering questions, whereas marketing research is more often going at, the higher order business strategy and executives. And so they pull in different directions and have kind of different sets of natural stakeholders. And from an individual contributor's perspective, this means that it's kind of hard to compare people. So if you're going to do something like, evaluate them, performance review time or something, it's hard to put those things on the same scale. And so for that reason, although the methods overlap a lot, I think it's best to separate them, but, hopefully to have close coordination. So if I've been in one role or another, always try to work across the aisle there, but I feel like they're more optimal when they're separate.
Great. From Cindy, what about feasibility? I'm not sure the context of that question, so we will move on.
Yeah.
Next question from Krista. Have you encountered any quant UX work that is behavioral, not attitudinal, self-report, and pre-prototype? This is my favorite kind of work, and I've done quite a bit of it, but I have never had much luck finding other people who do it.
I'm not sure. Could you repeat the conditions there again, Justin?
Have you encountered any quant UX work that is behavioral, not attitudinal, / self-report and pre-prototype?
Okay. Behavior. Okay. The answer is yes. So it's there are a number of different forms of this, but one of the things that we've had a talk on last year at the Quant UX conference is a segmentation of Quant UX researchers and projects. And at a high level, they're kind of three buckets there. And one bucket is, survey focused research. And another bucket is more kind of, behavioral reported research. And another is, logs analysis. So actually instrumented data. And so there are many projects out there that, are involving either a released or a pre-released or a prototype product that is deeply instrumented to look at what people are actually doing with it. And I've done work like this where we've given prototypes out to people to have them use it for time and then come back to look at both what they say about using it, their experience, but also what they actually did with it. And that's, often kind of expensive and difficult research to orchestrate, but I think it's just incredibly valuable. And so when you find out, one project I did many years ago, a prototype, we got it out there, and basically out of 25 people, no one continued to use it, and so we could show exactly how that worked. It's a great application of Quant UX.
Great. We got a bunch more questions. Um, hmm. What was the base rate calculated? Say, was the base rate calculated based on a separate survey question, an awareness question? Do you know the context
And
for
then I
that?
said, so we asked people, no, it was on this kind of, exactly as shown there, which was folks would see a subset of the tasks. And so we broke it into smaller chunks but essentially it was a grid question. So, for backing up cloud data, which of these brands is best? And they could say, brands, A through, whatever, or I don't know, or, so forth. So they had some opt-out possibilities there, but it was just essentially pick one.
Great. Let's see. The relevant items max diff quadrant example brings up the importance of sampling correctly. If you get too many of one type of user, your aggregate importances will be biased accordingly. Do you have guidelines for how to get the right sample for UX research?
Oh, well, that's the classic concern. And I guess what I would say is that the fact that we did the relevant items, and one reason we developed that, and was to help deal with that because we knew that we would have differential access, to the sample, and so there's a bit of built-in correction I think from that. And then the hierarchical Bayes methods have a bit more correction because each individual is able to have, their own location in the distribution. So, and there's some other things I won't go into that, can help with that statistically. But then really in attention to the sample. And the thing that I would highlight is the importance, which I mentioned briefly, of following up. So we got this large scale map, but then we asked questions, and this went up to the CEO of Cloud at the time of why is this thing in this place, and that led to some follow up research. So I'd say it's a first approximation. We tried to make it as good of an approximation as we can, but you're always going to need some sort of triangulation and follow up.
Great. Chris, are you okay to go a little past the top of the hour?
I can if folks are still here. Yeah.
Yeah, even if they drop off, we'll send a recording out. So if you wouldn't mind, we'll just keep on plugging away for a while.
No.
You're a popular guy, Chris. Lots of questions.
Well, thank you.
Did I hear you say there is a Python version of the book coming out?
There's the book R for Marketing Research and Analytics. There is a Python version now. It's called Python for Marketing Research and Analytics, and it covers many of the same. I think roughly 2/3 of the chapters are the same. There are a couple topics that are in the R book that are not in the Python book, such as conjoint analysis. Is in or choice-based conjoint analysis is only in the R book because there was not a good package for that at the time the Python book was written. But there's some other topics such as segmentation and clustering topics and some machine learning topics where the Python book has material that's not in the R book. So they're designed to work together if one reads both of them with some overlap but different code bases. But they also have some unique topics in each one.
Great, thank you. What do you believe is the catalyst for the growth of UX and conversely the stagnation of MRX insights roles?
Yeah, I think the catalyst, I would say, for the growth of user experience research is, the growth of engineering and the fact that it's, so closely tied to engineering. And so what, tends to happen in many organizations is they start with engineering only in the startup mode. And then, by the time they reach some, modest size, they start to realize that they need some insight from users or customers, and then they'll have a design team, and then they'll want a user experience researcher. And so as soon as they have user experience design doing any sort of interaction creation for the product, then they'll pretty soon want to have UX research. And so it largely just mirrors the growth of engineering organizations. Whereas marketing research, because it's kind of separate, It doesn't have any intrinsic scale that's tied to engineering. So I think that's the main difference.
Thank you, Chris. Are you getting tired of talking yet?
Not yet. No, I'll talk about this stuff all day. So.
Okay, question from Michelle. Have you conducted a max diff or conjoint on a relatively new product category where most people do not have a lot of experience or no experience?
Yes.
How is the quality of the results? Did they play out true in the market?
Yeah. So the answer is yes, I have, and you have to be careful about it, and you know the there's several things I'd say. One is there's some literature in the academic marketing research literature on what's called information acceleration, which basically means helping people get some experience and education about the concept before doing the conjoint. I've often done that paired with focus group settings. We bring people in, we expose them to the product, and we might even send them home with the product for a week or two and bring them back and then have them do a conjoint analysis task in person as part of this focus group. You get extremely high quality data from that because people pay attention to the task on the survey, but you also know that they've had some real exposure and education and opportunity to ask questions. So that's a method I often use for new products. But of course, you have to interpret the results as being hypothetical and about some sort of future looking stated preference that's hard to project to the market. So, in terms of comparing it to actual in-market results later, that's I think that'd be tricky to do. But in terms of using it as informative data and pairing it, especially with qualitative data as to why and what they're doing with the product, it's extremely informative and I think far better than just opinion or other things. So I do that a lot.
Great. Thanks, Chris. In organizations with few quant UX researchers, stakeholders are not familiar with the quant UX discipline, and resources are diverted to marketing research. What's the most effective strategy to get buy-in for quant UX projects?
Yeah. The one that I've seen most often, most effective, I don't know. I guess I'd have to say, yeah, not sure. But the one I've seen that's most common and seems to be effective is to identify quant projects and then execute them in-house. And the argument to do that is often one of cost savings. If we do a segmentation project with, a supplier, it will cost X amount, but I think we can do it in-house and it will cost, less than that. But that needs specialized expertise. And so oftentimes then what you'll see is that someone who's in a UX research role or perhaps a contractor who's hired, to work on the staff for a project will do it. And then you say, oh, this was successful. We could do more of it if we hire. And so you use that as kind of the nucleus for, for bringing people into that role. And, that's the most common strategy I've seen.
Great. Let's see here. What's your recommendations for an experienced market researcher trying to learn basic R to do basic cross-tabulation analysis with survey data before branching into the more complex modeling? What's the best way to learn R? Many of the resources are not specific to market research survey analysis.
Yeah. Well, that's, that's why we wrote the R for marketing research book. It was kind of our target were folks in marketing research who, don't know R, but want to learn it or want to learn more of it. So it's introductory to intermediate level on that and all applied. But I would say besides that, the most important thing I think is to have the right conditions to force yourself to do it. R is a language, and just like a human spoken language, if you don't use it, you will forget it. And so you have to put yourself in a situation where you're going to use it. And, if I want to get better at, speaking Japanese, where I speak only a few words, if I put myself in Japan and force myself to do it, that's going to be the practice that I need to get better at it. But the same would be true for R. It's very easy for any given project to say, oh, R is so tough. It's going so slowly. I'm really struggling with the basic things. I'm going to turn over to, SPSS or Minitab or Excel or something else and get my answer because I just need an answer for this project. If you're in that situation a lot, you've really got to find a way to give yourself the room as well as the energy to work through it in R again, with whatever amount of time is needed, and then repeat that. So force yourself to do it for the next project, the next project. Save some code snippets. Our book is, I think, a good repository of fairly simple code. To be honest, I use the code library from the book all the time myself to start new projects. I'm like, gee, that code's been written. I can copy it and apply it again to a new data set. So I think getting in that mindset of like, I'm going to force myself to do it to keep my fluency up. But I'm going to build a repository of, kind of canned things. So kind of like popular phrases in a foreign language, I'm going to have those at hand so I can draw on them to use. And so, that's the challenge, I think, with R.
Thank you. Could you elaborate on the programming knowledge needed for a quant UX role? Is it needed for data analysis mostly, or are there other tasks?
Yeah, it's primarily for data munging and acquisition. So oftentimes in the quant UX role, and I would say there are organizations out there that do not require specific programming for quant UX roles. They just require stats and data experience. But I think the programming is advantageous. We talk about this in the book, and the primary reason is that data are going to come in all kinds of crazy formats and or you may have to interact programmatically with a database or a data system or a product to acquire the data, and having kind of a basic level general programming fluency is going to let you accomplish those tasks. It's not about highly optimized algorithms or data science kind of brain teaser type programming. It shouldn't be about any of that. It's really about data acquisition and data management and munging to just get things done.
Thank you. A few more here from Cindy. Chris you talked about how to prioritize features based on importance and satisfaction, competitive position. What about feasibility? Do we need to consider for that?
Oh, yeah, that was something that my colleague Eric, who I mentioned earlier, often did. And so he was at the time that we worked together at Google Cloud. He was in charge of the roadmap for across the entire cloud space of all the different potential features and what we might do when and the sequence of those and so forth. And it was a distributed thing. It wasn't that he dictated that, but he was the point person to kind of collect and discuss that and organize and synthesize how the product management team talked about that. And one of the things that he has shown in a different public talk that we did was how he used the importance from MaxDiff together with some estimates of engineering feasibility and engineering costs to basically find the set of items that would deliver for a fixed amount of engineering effort that would deliver the maximum customer importance, relative to the cost. And so he found in one project, for example, that there was an item that was, I think, number 2 or number 3 in customer importance in the cloud space, but it had the single lowest engineering cost. It was something like, a day or two of engineering effort. I forget the exact amount, but he was saying, wow, this thing, it's not number 1, but number 1 is something that's 3 months of effort, and number 3 here is a couple days of effort or something. And so he was able to identify things where we say, in aggregate, they were delivering, a much higher value relative to what we could do. And so, so I'd say that's exactly the sort of analysis that could be done with feasibility as well.
Thank you. We'll do two more. Does Quant UX research differ between products, such as a Kindle versus the Amazon e-commerce website?
Yes, it will differ, between products and even within a product. So there are, so for example, if I think of, if I think of the projects that I do for, a mature kind of product line, Kindle would be an example. Would be one where customers understand the product pretty well. There's a large user base, a relatively mature market, but with some, new entrants and new features. That's one where you make a lot of headway with classic survey methods and stated preference and conjoint analysis and max diff and that sort of thing. It fits that product very well. Whereas if it's something that's really new and emerging, an example was when I worked at Microsoft on a wearable camera that people could wear and do it. There was nothing like that that existed at the time, but published some papers on that. That's one where it's probably going to be pretty difficult to ask about stated preference. You can, it'd be interesting to know what people say, but you really have got to get them using the product and seeing what they're doing with it and prototyping it and doing rapid iterations on that, on the actual experience. And so this would be a very different set of research projects and therefore a pretty different set of methods that would underlie them.
Okay, last question. Do you see UX teams avoiding Quant UX in favor of qual research because that's what they are more comfortable with? If so, do you have any strategies to help change that mindset?
Oh, yeah, that's a great question. And yeah, I think, it's like any organization, if there's a new capability that a team doesn't have now, it can span anywhere from fear to enthusiasm and excitement. And so I often see UX teams that, really eager to learn more about quant, and perhaps not realizing, that there's a pretty deep skill set there and a language to learn for that. So that would be on the enthusiasm side to, sometimes a defensive posture on more of the fear side and, wanting to say, oh, that's just marketing or that's just data science or something. And trying to shut it out. And of course, most folks are, most teams are going to be in the middle and have some mixture of different attitudes in that space. I would say the number one strategy that well, two, I guess, that I've used to deal with that. Number one is to try to find quant UX folks who are very friendly to UX, and meaning that they come from a UX back. I was a so-called qualitative UX researcher before I moved into the quant area. Thanks to my background, and so I'm extremely friendly to the so-called qualitative side of things. And I think finding people who are, and you know as opposed to, let's say, someone who might be a stereotypical hardcore data scientist and doesn't want to have anything to do with qualitative. There are not that many of those, but sometimes there are folks out there. You want to find folks who don't have that attitude on the quant side but are really open and friendly. And then the second strategy, I think, is to find appropriate quant methods that are approachable to folks in the general UX space. And one Justin briefly mentioned in the introduction that I taught choice modeling methods, to hundreds of colleagues. Those are almost all general UX researchers, product managers, designers, that sort of thing. And I taught them how to do max diff, how to run their own max diff and to do it well and to bring that bar down. And so I think finding ways in which quant methods can diffuse into those roles and show how powerful and informative they can be for those folks, then in turn, makes them more friendly, and it helps them clarify the things that they know and don't know. So someone might know that they can run a max diff successfully, but not feel comfortable running a segmentation. But with that kind of experience, they then start to see the boundaries and the places in which each role can reinforce and boost the other.
Great. Thank you so much, Chris. There's a few more questions here, but we'll just have them email you. And we just appreciate your time this morning. Thanks everybody for coming, and we will talk later. And have a great day. See you guys.
Well, thank you so much. It's been great to be here.
Thanks, Chris. Bye.